In an Instagram world where keeping up with the Joneses is no longer good enough and you have to worry about the Kardashians, overconsumerism is now propelling behaviors that have really affected many locations around Europe. I'm Rafael Di Furia. Welcome back to another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter, and roll that intro. Over the last years, if you've been keeping up with news in Europe, you'll probably at some point heard the word overtourism, except for that period of time around 2020 or so. We'll just say that was an exception. And especially recently in the news, like I mentioned last week, there have been a number of protests across Spain, from the Canary Islands all the way into Barcelona. And I mean, even with what was going on in Barcelona, you were seeing protesters, locals, spraying individuals sitting down at cafes with water using, can't use the word here on YouTube, so we'll just call them children's water pew-pew toys, because they go pew-pew-pew, but with water. So we'll just leave it at that. I mean, can you imagine sitting down at a cafe and then all of a sudden this random group of people shouting in a language that maybe you're not familiar with, shouting all of these things, looking angry, and you're getting sprayed with water? Who knows what could be in that liquid? And I mean, in this day and age, it could literally be almost anything. Is it the appropriate answer, though, to target individuals in that way? I personally might disagree with that and say it's actually maybe a symptom of a greater problem, and that even something as simple as spraying water on another individual in this way doesn't take care of the issue. And yeah, okay, you'll get some news headlines, but is anything really going to come from it? Maybe, maybe not. And while there's no guilty or innocent, the individuals sitting down at the cafe aren't necessarily guilty of anything in particular, because it's not an individual. It's the whole group of everybody from everywhere going and absolutely inundating these particular locations. And of course, there are many places around Europe that have just not been touched by overtourism. But if we look at one of Europe's most touristed destinations, Venice, things have gotten absolutely mad there. The amount of tourists that have come to the city per year has been growing exponentially, and it went from single-digit millions all the way up to double-digit in the tens of millions. So one thing that the city of Venice has started doing to try and help with taking care of the city is that they've introduced a fee to get into the city. If I'm not mistaken, it's something like, say, €5. But is that really the way to combat the situation? Yes, it's absolutely a way of bringing revenue into the city to be able to make sure that the streets stay clean, the water is taken care of, the lagoon is taken care of. Although, I don't know if it's necessarily the best choice. There are already taxes put in place, like what you do see in Italy in many locations is that for staying in a hotel, you will have a city fee. For staying there, it'll be X amount of euros per day. And if you are staying in the city itself, then you won't have to pay this tax on top of what you're already paying for the hotel. It would be, say, for like a day tripper. Although there is another exception for individuals who do live in the Veneto region, the region that Venice itself is in. And so they wouldn't need to pay this either. But then on top of even all of that, this is something that many Italians have actually been calling into question if this is legal to do or not, because under the Italian constitution, there is the freedom of movement that is guaranteed within the Italian nation. Like a regular town. This is not a place that was built to be a tourist destination. This was a city built on the water to be a place where people can live and thrive and live their lives. And just look at the history of Venice and how large of an area they actually had an influence over. This is something that is really, really impressive. But now it's turned into more or less like an amusement park, a Disneyland with an Italian kind of theme to it. I will say, as I've said in many episodes of Not Your Average Globetrotter, it's a place that I have a love and dislike relationship with it. I wouldn't necessarily say hate, but it can be unpleasant to go and spend time there. It's been a few years since I've been, as some of you know. Venice, there is really something wonderful about it, especially when it's quiet, but when it's packed with tourists who are there, packed into the streets, shoulder to shoulder, and you're trying to walk down a small alleyway street, and you feel like you're in a line at Disneyland because nobody is able to move. It's extremely unpleasant. So, of course, this brings me to another point, that the overtourism that we're seeing now doesn't just simply have a negative impact on locals, but also tourists. When you put too many people into a small place, things are going to get very uncomfortable very quickly. Just before we get into the next section of this episode, I do want to say a huge thank you to those of you who helped to make this project possible, as well as a thank you to those of you who help by subscribing and sharing these episodes, as well as taking part in the conversation in the comment section below here on YouTube. And of course, the biggest thank you goes to those of you who help on a monthly basis through rafaeldifuria.com/Patreon, patreon.com/rafaeldifuria, or the one-time donations such as the thanks button here on YouTube, as well as rafaeldifuria.com/support. So thank you also very, very much. And just to get back into the rest of the episode now, of course, we do have to talk about some of the downsides that we're seeing from so many people over-touristing these wonderful locations around the continent. And that would be cost of living going up everywhere. A lot of apartments are used as holiday rentals, whether it's an Airbnb or not, but whatever, a holiday rental apartment. And sometimes, yes, these apartments actually can be a lot less expensive than dealing with a hotel. Although what is happening is that there are so many owners looking at the profits that they can make from just a few months a year instead of over the course of 12 months, and seeing that just a few months of the year can pay more than 12 months and you don't have to deal with certain aspects of red tape or whatever it may be, it starts looking attractive. I mean, I can definitely understand that. In this world, you need to be able to earn an income. And if you have the ability to maximize your income, then why wouldn't you want to do that? I think it's just basic human nature. But of course, this has the negative effect of leading to a rental and purchasing market that gets so overinflated because so many people from around the world will want to visit these locations. And then on top, we're seeing more and more destinations around Europe that people are wanting to move to, relocate to from international locations around the world, big cities, large cities, villages, whatever it may be. There are a lot of people who are interested in living a life on the other side of the world, and I don't blame them. I've done it myself. Well, actually, to get technical, though, I am still doing it. And so there are going to be people, though, who do say, well, hey, you're a foreigner living in one of these countries. You went from the other side of the world, and you're just making the problem bigger. There's an interesting point that maybe is being raised. However, at the same time, I try not to make that difference. I try not to have the negative impact that comes along with so many people from so many places around the world. Of course, there's no way to be perfect about this, because even if individuals are just staying in their home country and trying to live their daily lives, with how much inflation and various other aspects of life have been driving up the cost of everything, of course, we're seeing the prices go up everywhere. So there are certain factors that don't have to do with tourism, that don't have to do with individuals relocating from the other side of the world. I mean, even if we're talking about how many people are actually in Portugal from abroad, yes, there is a significant number. But there are a lot of people who say, oh, look at all the Americans that come here. They're buying all the property. They're moving here, blah, 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 blah. But I just recently heard, I don't know if this number is accurate or not, but from what I've heard before based on other statistics, it sounded right to me that the actual number of American citizens living in Portugal is only like around, say, 11,000+ people. Granted, in a country of 12 million, 9 million, 10 million, however many million, a number like that can actually be quasi-noticeable. We're talking about a very small country here overall, the population of the size of a major city in some other places. Of course, the thing is, because there are so many tourists, you notice them even more so. But of course, for the people who are living in these locations, there's going to be the difference between an individual who is residing there and trying to be a productive member of society, paying their taxes, doing what they have to do. I mean, for me, this is very important that if I'm living in a place that I try to live on local terms. I've mentioned this in a number of episodes, trying not to overspend, trying not to underspend, trying to live at the same level that everybody else is living. Maybe I have a little catching up to do in some regards in some places, but I think this is something that a lot of people should really take into consideration when they're moving to a place. And being able to get to know people and being able to have a life in that place, to get to know the culture, the language, the customs, really can make such a wonderful experience. But of course, this has to do with overtourism as well, because when you see so many people just honing in on one location, you stop seeing infrastructure for individuals who are living their day-to-day lives there. Schools, buses, social services, supermarkets, stores, whatever it could be that a person would need in their regular day-to-day life. Some of these spaces that are being used for maybe a clothing store or, I don't know, a pharmacy or a seamstress might be more valuable to be used as a trinket shop. And in some parts of Europe, we are seeing that, where the stores that you would normally see, maybe somebody even selling vegetables, being turned into a little knick-knack store with all of the same things that are made in some factory on the other side of the world. And this is another problem that we are also seeing in Europe as well. Because we're seeing so many of these knickknacks that have to be made, they're being made en masse, probably in just a few factories in a particular location on the other side of the world. Feel free to take a guess at where I'm pointing towards here. It has nothing to do with sentiments towards a particular country or not. It's just statistically more likely that certain things are made in certain parts of the world. It doesn't matter where you are. You could be in a small town, like a small city called Freiburg in Breisgau, and maybe you have a magnet that you see there available, and that same magnet came from the same factory that is making the magnets for Lisbon, Portugal. And yes, I have definitely bought some of those things over the years that have probably been made in some of those factories because that's all that's available. If you're wanting just a little memento from your time in a particular place, I mean, you can see some of the things that I've purchased here. I mean, of course, I've mentioned this little Roman helmet here, and like this you've seen in the background, this little Lisbon trolley car. I mean, these are things that for me are nice to remember and to see and think of fun times that I had. I've mentioned this before in other episodes. Some of those handmade things that you would want to purchase or things that look handmade are just made in a factory and aren't as available as they might have once been in the past. But generally speaking, the more touristy we see places becoming, the less authentic they end up feeling. I mean, I can't say the amount of times in various locations around Europe when I've gone into a store, attempted to even try to speak the local language and have gotten the response, sorry, hey, I don't speak that language, insert X language here. Do you speak English? And I respond, yeah, I do speak English. But like for me, going to another country is going to have an experience. It's not just going to a place. If I want to go to Disneyland, I'll go to Disneyland. I'm not going to Disneyland, but I would if I wanted to. If I go to Germany, if I go to a city in Germany, if I go to a village in Germany, if I go to Poland, if I go wherever, I want to feel like I am there. I don't want to feel this general touristy, over-consumeristic feeling that has been so washed across the European landscape. That you could be in Paris, you could be in Krakow, you could be in Barcelona, and there are going to be certain things it's like, oh, I'm in a tourist city. I'm not in a city. I'm not in a place where people are necessarily calling home. Granted, people do call these places home. However, what I'm talking about here is that there is a feeling of what you see around you, of say you're just walking through the street and you have the restaurants all lined up one after the other and you have all of the menus out in front with all of the pictures on them. You see pictures on a menu in Europe. Be careful. And then on top, forget the pictures, you have the waiters standing outside, approaching you in English, overly aggressively saying, hey, come on, look at what we have here and come try our food. This is not what you want to experience. A good restaurant is not going to be begging you to come in. And for people coming from the other side of the world, they may or may not be accustomed to this. And they may not be accustomed to having people saying, hey, come to my restaurant. They might think, oh, look, this waiter's being so friendly and kind. Maybe he's trying to help us because he sees we're hungry and blah, 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 blah. No, avoid those places. Really, avoid those places. Granted, there are actually some restaurants that do succumb to those behaviors that are not bad, and they're actually pretty decent. But when you spend enough time in this part of the world, it really becomes very off-putting. And when we see small fishing villages, places that might have once been a wonderful place to raise a family, for example, with beaches that were clean and just wonderful and serene, we're seeing some of these places being turned into party towns for hen do's and stag do's. Translation for my fellow Americans, bachelor and bachelorette parties. And of course, the individuals who might be using the word hen do, stag do could be at the heart of the problem for some of these locations because of how popular that they've become. For example, I think even in the Canary Islands, one of the biggest complaints from locals has been that they have a difficult time leading their lives because they just have so many drunk people around all over the place, and the ability to live a normal daily life has become more and more difficult, and more places are catering to those tourists and not the locals. Of course, though, not everywhere in Europe suffers from overtourism, but it is becoming more and more of a problem because as we're seeing some of the more popular locations get even more crowded, we're seeing this trickle-down effect of, oh wait, there's this other city, or these videos that you see online. Hey, if you want the new top secret place that doesn't have all the crowds of XYZ, then you have to go check out this place. And so as time goes on, we're seeing more of these smaller towns that were once very pleasant for both tourists and locals becoming unpleasant for everybody. And as somebody who lives in Europe, I will say most definitely there are some gorgeous, amazing places to visit, full of history and just wonder, even natural beauty. But also at the very same time, I can very easily say that so much of Europe is so overrated, so that I don't understand some of the need for this tourism and travel. I mean, of course, there are plenty of videos online where you can watch people analyzing this topic to no end, and why Instagram has become such a place where it's leading to more consumerism, or people that are seeing their friends leading the beautiful lives in the beautiful places and doing all the traveling all around the world and feeling like they have to keep up with that. This is becoming very toxic. I mean, I think there are some really, really wonderful things about social media and how it connects people, but there is such a thing as being too overconnected and sharing too much. How much people share about what they're doing in their everyday lives. Okay, this is going off in a completely different direction, but I do definitely see that this is a problem. And granted, I have been making videos about living abroad for how many years now? I don't know how many years now, but it's been going on for a while. So is this project contributing to that? I hope not, because the main goal of this project has been to share the realities of some of these places. There have been plenty of times where I've tried to share like some of the negative sides, and there have been comments left on the videos, even personal interactions with other individuals. Oh my gosh, this place, it's amazing, it's wonderful, blah, 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 dreaming about this while they're sitting in a place that maybe smells like sewage. And then I'm saying, hey, we're sitting in a place that smells like sewage. I'm going to be leaving soon. And they say, but it's so beautiful here. It's really important to balance reality into some of these decisions that you're making. Not everything is roses, rainbows, butterflies, and unicorns. But if you are interested in making a home for yourself in Europe, be sure to check out episode 349 of Not Your Average Globetrotter, where I do talk a bit more about where to move in Europe. I'm Rafael Di Furia. Stay safe and healthy out there. Thank you all so much for joining me for this episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter, and I'll see you all next time. Later.